you really still complaining about the Mark IV versus the Mark V Supra? Today we're gonna break down everything from the Mark IV to the Mark V, because I'm gonna go out there and just say it now. Nothing about these two cars is similar, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. We're gonna break this video down into three components: exterior, interior, and power plant. And with that, I'm gonna tie in transmission. So first off, let's start with the interior of both cars. So you've heard by now, this car is half BMW, half Toyota, but I don't necessarily see that as a bad thing. On the interior, it is very obvious that it is BMW. You have BMW buttons, you have a BMW screen, you have a BMW software, you even have the BMW chime. The seats are pretty Toyota, so it's not all BMW, but it's 99% BMW on the inside. Fit and finish is nice, everything is levered to the touch. This is the launch edition, so we actually have the carbon fiber option. We do more have like a kind of a plastic panel on top, but what you're getting for an under $60,000 car is just about right. One of the nicest things about this whole entire interior is this cluster. It's very futuristic. It actually kind of reminds me of the S2K vibes with like these loading screen gas and coolant temperature gauges. When the car starts up, you're greeted with a whole bunch of lights, beeps, and chimes, which feel good, but again, are BMW. Obviously, this car isn't automatic, but it is an 8-speed automatic, and it actually feels great. On the driving basis of the car, I have no complaints. It shifts how you want it to shift. It's nice and crisp. It's not lurky, it's not jerky, it's not laggy, and it's quick. It feels good for what it is. In this day and age, you have to remember that technology is what's taking over everything. So as every car gets newer, it's gonna follow the nicest tech. And with that, beyond the transmission, this thing comes with lane assist, it comes with adaptive cruise control, it comes with heads-up display, it comes with every bell and whistle that you could want in a car that you wanted daily, every single day, and have the sporty era of a car, just like the Mark IV did. The one thing though that you cannot complain about, that is the only similarities between these two cars, is we still have our hatch design. This is pretty much the only similarity that this car shares with the Mark IV. It's just a hatch, that's pretty much it. It fits a lot of stuff. Other than that, it's pretty basic. Jumping into the Mark IV, this car needs no introduction. You guys are probably very familiar with it at this point, but this is 100% the most driver-oriented car I've ever been in. Every gauge faces towards you. It pretty much leaves nothing for the passenger to look at other than its JDM style glove box and the view of what's coming up. There's nothing too fancy about the Mark IV interior other than this was the RZ model from Japan, so it actually came with an active front lip that came on when you went over about 40 miles per hour or so. Other than that, it has no technology that's really worth noting. I feel like some people are a little upset that the interior of the Mark V isn't so Mark IV focused. The one car that I do see coming out that reminds me of this is actually the C8. Although the Mark V does feel pretty oriented towards you, nothing really beats this spaceship cockpit design of the Mark IV. Moving on to my favorite part about the Mark V, the exterior. I want you to do your best to put aside all your hate because BMW had to play in this car and really look at these cars on a basic level. They're not that different looking. The Mark IV has a huge front hood. It has huge front headlights. It even has a huge mouth down below. Coming to the Mark V, you have a huge front portion of the car. You have massive headlights. You have the massive front grille. And if that's not enough, moving on to the cockpit areas, very, very short, very, very small. Very, very short, very, very small. Side scoops on the lower side skirts. Well, fake side scoops on the lower side skirts, but we'll get to that in just a moment. Not until you get to the rear end of the car that you really kind of see differences. And other than that, in my opinion, they took what was a 90s design, a 25-year-old design, and they tried to recreate it the best they could in the era of 2020. And in my opinion, it's really not that far off. And I actually love the way this looks. I love them both the same, but I love the Mark IV in a 90s generation type of love, and I love this in a 2020 generation. I don't think you can compare them because they're on two different timelines, but this thing does look very good. So the Mark V came with a bunch of fake vents and a bunch of room for aftermarket companies to provide products with this car. Now, while Doug DeMuro seemed to shame that, I actually think that's one of the best things that they could have done. They more or less made the car cheaper to distribute to people, so then at that point, people who got the car like myself, who want to do aftermarket capabilities, can then do it at their own time. Now, keep in mind, they made it cheaper. If they were to added all that stuff and made, let's say, a TRD version, which they will probably make in the next couple of years, it would have brought the price point higher. But the fact that they left that stuff out, which I understand how that could be seen as a negative thing, but they left that stuff out, making it cheaper for more people to own, which I think is a great option. It allows you at that point to upgrade as you please and decide how much you want to spend on it. Now let me show you what I mean here. You notice all throughout this car there are vents that you think are passed through, but they're not. You're starting from the back right here. This stem follows through the wheel well and comes through the front door right here, or what I like to call like the side skirt kind of airflow. Moving up to the front, you have a grill right here that is supposed to flow through the wheel well and then exit out through the top of the hood. So all of that stuff pops out, and we will for sure be doing this at a later video and removing all the vents to see what it kind of looks like. But stuff like that, to even leaving out drilled holes for a strut brace. Even the trunk has extra layering of metal underneath here so that if you wanted to mount an aftermarket wing, you would be able to, and the original trunk would be able to support it. All of that in efforts just to keep the cost down. That's a win-win in my book. What the Mark IV is most famous for, the 2JZ motor. This motor made waves very, very early on in its timeline. The fact that you had a cast iron block, it could handle a bunch of power, and you were able to easily ditch the twins and throw a fat single on there and make 800 horsepower. The inline 6 turbo design was something that became very, very popular after the Fast and Furious series, and at one point really became the staple of what the Supra was. Everyone loves this motor, everyone does swaps with this motor, everyone's always after these motors, and eventually they're gonna go extinct very, very soon. Now this is where I think a lot of people got upset. When the Mark IV was released and it didn't have 2JZ technology, it didn't have a Toyota Powerplant technology, I think that's where everyone decided they wanted to try and hate this car. But BMW's B58 isn't as far off as you believe. 2JZ, inline turbo 6. From factory, making around 330 horsepower, depending if you had US or Japan spec. B58 in the Mark V Supra, inline 6 turbo, making 330 horsepower from the factory. With a tune, you can get 50, 60 horsepower out of this thing, making close to about 400 horsepower. Same thing with the Mark IV Supra. Although it is not a Toyota-based power plant, the fact that they took one of BMW's best products that they have made after the N55, N54 era, threw it in what is now the Mark V, it's a win-win in my book. And honestly, the inline 6 doesn't sound that far off, in my opinion, than the 2JZ. Is a slight inline 6 tone that does kind of sound the same. I will go ahead and say this now. I think in 5-10 years time, when this motor really becomes a lot more researched, a lot more tuned, start coming up, and a lot more aftermarket industry really develops on this B58, I think that people are going to find that there's a lot more capability out of this motor than we originally had thought. And maybe it's a good thing that the Mark V Supra came with the B58 motor, and it's not as different as we had originally thought. So all in all, comparing the Mark V to the Mark IV, the Mark V is not the Mark IV. The Mark IV is not the Mark V. As an owner of both of them, I don't think that you can honestly compare them. They're not supposed to be the same car. This is a 25-year later remake of a car that takes certain characteristics of the Mark IV and throws it in the Mark V. Since owning it, I've actually enjoyed the 8-speed automatic. I've actually enjoyed the technology features that it has. If I want to drive a 90s Legends beast, I'll take that car. If I want a modern day beast, I'll take this car. I think they're two different cars. I love them both for each different reasons. And at the current moment, that's kind of where I stand. I want to hear you guys' comments down below. How do you feel? Do you really think it's that big of a deal that BMW had to play in this? Would you have wanted Toyota's technology in this car and then people complain that, oh, Toyota didn't live up to the name? Or maybe just keep the 2JZ and then people would have complained that they didn't make any updates, or it's the same motor for the last 25 years, or doesn't have the fuel economy, or doesn't have auto start off. There's a whole different ways to go about looking at it, but I think everything about it is just perfect. That's all I got for today's video. If you want to see more videos on the Mark V, be sure to subscribe and hit that notifications button to get notified every time we upload a new video. Thank you so much for watching. Peace out and keep moving